This is a detailed overview of the Pocket Toolpath strategy. We're going to look at all of the options within the form and show the effects of the different settings that you have on the toolpaths that you create. So let's go to File, Close. So let's start by opening an existing file. So from the project folder, we're going to open Pocket Toolpath Example 1. So here I have a set of vectors and we're going to use these to demonstrate the Pocket Toolpath. To locate the Pocket Toolpath, let's switch over to the Toolpaths tab, and before we get into the Pocket Toolpath, we must ensure that we check over our material setup. So for this example, we're working with a material thickness of 1/2 inch. Our XY datum position is in the lower left-hand corner, which you can see indicated by this red square in the 2D view. Z0 position is on the material surface, and then you want to check over your rapid Z gaps above the material home and start position, ensuring that they're all safe and appropriate for your particular setup. So the Pocket Toolpath allows you to take whatever vectors you have selected and machine inside of those to clear out the material down to your specified cut depth. And the Pocket Toolpath can be located on the top row in our toolpath operations, and it's the second icon in the list. So we'll start by selecting this square to use as an example of how the Pocket Toolpath works. Starting at the top of the form, we've got this section here called cutting depth. So this is where we specify a start depth and a cut depth. Now we want this to start on the top of our material, which is going to be at 0. So we're going to leave that at 0 there. And we specify our cut depth. So this is how much we want to cut into the material. So for example, we can just type in a value. So we'll just go with 1/4 inch in there. Next up is our tool section. So currently we have nothing selected. I can't see anything in the list here. So in order for us to select a tool, we use the select option here, and that will open up our tool database. So in here, we could go ahead and select a tool. For example, let's choose a 1/4 inch end mill. And within the tool database, we're able to see some key information about this tool, the parameters, feeds and speeds, and that kind of thing. And you'd want to check that everything is safe and appropriate for what you're cutting. So we'll just use the select option there. Then within the tools section, you have the option to remove the tool, so that will take that out. So we're just going to press select. We're just going to go back in with the 1/4 inch tool. And then over on the right hand side here, we have an edit option. And if we click on the edit option, that will enable us to kind of focus on parameters that will affect this particular toolpath, but not the tool in the actual tool database. So we can make changes to this if we wanted to. So let's take a look at the cutting parameters. So here we have pass depth and the step over. So the pass depth is the amount of Z that the tool can travel through the material and safely cut. The moment that's at 1/8 inch. I'm going to change that for this example to be 1/4 inch. That's the equivalent of the actual cut depth that we've got specified. So we'd expect this toolpath to be created in one single Z level. Then we have our step over. So this is the horizontal distance between each pass that the tool is going to take. And we're going to look at the effects of this in a moment. Then we have feeds and speeds. Now this tutorial is a guide to demonstrate the Pocket Toolpath, so I'm not going to worry about adjusting the feeds and speeds. However, if you were to cut this, you would need to check that the settings are safe for your setup and application. So we'll just go ahead and press OK here. Then we have the option to alter our passes. So we can currently see that we are going to machine this in one single pass, which is what we spoke about earlier. For the pass depth of the tool itself matches that of the cut depth that we're creating. So it's going to do that in one pass. And you can edit the passes, but we'll come back to this later on in the tutorial. Next up, we have two options to actually machine this strategy in an offset or in a raster pattern. So offset will follow the shape of the vectors, and then the raster pattern will just go back and forth, where we can then have the option to choose whether we want to put a profile pass on that also. And again, we'll come back to this shortly. So let's just go with the offset pattern here. Then we have the option to ramp into the material using ramp plunge move. So this means that as the tool is entering the material, that it will use a diagonal move rather than a straight plunge into the material. In some cases with certain tooling, this can actually help reduce the wear of the tool. Okay, then we can give this toolpath a name, so I can just type in a name there if I wanted to. We'll just leave that as pocket, and then when we hit calculate, the software will automatically open up the preview toolpaths form, where we're able to see a preview of how that toolpath is going to look if we was to machine this. So let's just zoom in on our toolpath here. Okay, so here we can see the distance between each of these toolpath moves is defined by the step over that we had set up for the tool. And we're going to look at that in a moment. Now, if we take a look up the y-axis, we can see that it's being cut on a single level, and that's because the pass depth matched the cut depth of the pocket, and so it's cleared that all within one pass. So if we just pop that back in Z, and then what we could do is in our preview toolpath form, we could give that a global fill, so let's just set that to green. And then what we could do is we can use the slider so we can alter the speed of our toolpath preview. And if we just go ahead and preview that, you'll see it's starting to cut that out. And then if we just go ahead and just speed that up, that's what we'll be left with. So you'll notice that the corners of our pocket have a radius corners, and that's due to the radius of the tool itself. Now, there's no way to avoid this other than using smaller and smaller tools to try to reduce its effect. Now, this is only really important if you are inlaying a sharp object into a pocket like this, and that's dealt with using a different toolpath strategy, which is covered in another video. So let's just go ahead and reset this preview. Just going to click to check the visibility of that toolpath, and now we're going to look at editing the tool parameters to see the effects that it has on this toolpath. So if we close out of the toolpath preview form, we can use this option here to edit our toolpath, and that will open up the pocket toolpath form where it has all of the settings that we used previously. So we're going to keep the same cut depth along with the same tool. Let's just go to the edit options for that tool. We'll look at some other things that we can alter. So the pass depth here, we currently have that at 1/4 inch, and you'd seen that that cleared that out in one pass because it was the same as our cut depth. Let's have a look at an example where we alter the pass depth to 1/8 inch. And so here we could go ahead and press OK. Now in this example, we're just going to press Control on the keyboard followed by clicking on the calculate button, and that will calculate our preview without opening up the preview toolpaths form, and this just makes it easier for us to make edits in this form if we need to, where we're able to see the effects of those results as well. So again, if we take a look at this up the y-axis, we're able to see how this is going to be machined, and you can see now we have two levels of cut, and that's because we altered our pass depth so that each pass was cut at 1/8 inch, and so it cuts one pass at 1/8, and then it will do its second pass at a further 1/8 inch to create the total pass depth of 1/4 inch. So that's why we're seeing the two different depths there. So let's just put that back in Z. Let's have a look at another example. So we're going to go to Edit. So this time we're going to change the pass depth back to 1/4 of an inch. So we're going to go back to that single depth of cut. And then we're going to look at the effects of altering the step over. So this is the distance horizontally between each one of these moves. Right then, so we currently have that at 0.1 or 40%. Let's just alter that. So we're going to make that 0.02 in this case, and you'll see that now I've entered that value, the software will automatically calculate the percentage value there. You can alter the percentage if you wanted to, or you could type in your precise step over. So let's try that at 8%, and we'll go ahead and press OK. Again, let's press Control and calculate, and the software will update that for us. So we can see here, just by looking at the 3D view, we have a much tighter step over. And so if we zoom in there, you can see that each of those lines are much closer together. It's more dense because the distance between the moves is a lot less. And then if we look up the y-axis, again, we can just see that cutting that in one single pass, and that's because we altered the pass depth there to 1/4 of an inch, again, to match the actual cut depth that we're cutting down to. So let's have a look at another example of altering the step over. So if we go into Edit, and then for the step over here, let's say we want to make this 80% step over. So we can type that in. It's going to tell us that's 0.2 inches. We can OK that. Press Control and calculate, and you can see now that we have a much larger distance between each of the passes. You'll also notice that the software has added these tails in, so we don't have any upstanding pieces of material left over in the corners. And so that's the effect of the pass depth and step over for this tool. So let's just put that back in Z, and we're just going to go to Edit. I'm just going to put these back to what they were originally. So a pass depth of 1/4 of an inch and a step over here of 0.1. Press OK, and then we could go ahead and press Control and calculate. Now let's explore the effects of changing the strategy or the pattern that we cut the pocket out. So currently we've used the offset strategy, which follows the shape of the vector that we're using. And the other option we have is the raster strategy, which basically goes back and forth inside of the vector, just as this graphic is showing here. We have the option to alter the raster angle. Okay, so at the moment we've got that set to 0. So the long moves will be parallel to the x-axis, and then you have the option here to have profile passes. We've got no profile pass, a profile pass first, or a profile pass last. We're going to set this to no profile pass. I'm just going to look at the effects of these settings. So here, let's go ahead and calculate that. So let's just slow down the speed of our preview, and then we'll go ahead and preview that toolpath. So you can see it's going back and forth parallel to the x-axis. We just speed that up a little. So let's just take a look at that in the ISO view, and we'll just zoom in over here. So you'll notice that where we've cut the pocket with a 40% step over, and in the raster strategy, we're actually left with cusps because we are using a round tool. Now that's okay, but I might want to make a nice smooth edge that actually follows the vector, and that's where the profile options can help. So if we just reset that preview, just pop that back in Z, and we can close out. Then we'll go back to edit the toolpath. So here we have the option to apply a profile pass. If we use the drop down option, we have first or last. Now they'll do the same result, it's just to do with the type of material that you may be cutting. Some materials will benefit from having the profile cut first so they don't chip when doing the raster pattern, and others benefit from running the profile last. So For an example, let's just have a look at what this looks like if we use the profile pass last option, and then we could go ahead and press calculate. So looking at the actual preview here, if we just zoom in, we can see we have our raster and we also have this profile line going around the outside. So if we just take a look at our preview, we'll just slow that down a little just so you can see how this will look. So if we preview that, it's going to do the raster first. Okay, I might just speed that up a little bit more so you can see those cusps, and then it's going to go around the outside to create the actual profile cut to remove that cusping effect. Okay, so there's that profile pass, and then if we zoom in, you can see we have nice clean edges there. So let's just put that back in Z, and now we're going to have a look at changing the angle. So we were machining that parallel to the x-axis. So let's have a look at changing that so it's parallel with the y-axis. So we'll just go ahead and reset that preview, close out, and then not only can we use this option here to edit the toolpath, but we can also double click on the toolpath and that will open up our existing toolpath for us to make those changes. So if we go to raster angle, we can alter that. So 0 is parallel with the x-axis. If we wanted that parallel to the y-axis, then we'd put in 90 degrees here. And for the purposes of just quickly showing you this, we'll just use the control and calculate option. And there we can see the effect of that. So it's now parallel to the y-axis. If I wanted to change that again, let's have a look at the effect of 30 degrees in there. And again, press Control and calculate. You can see now it's going at an angle there at the 30-degree angle. And then if we wanted to, we could just change that back to 0. So it's parallel with the x-axis. And again, press Control and calculate. Another item to consider when using the offset strategy or using a profile pass on the raster strategy is the cut direction, where you have the option to climb, or you can use conventional cutting. Now, to learn more about this and to find out which option would be best for the application that you are using, you can research these methods online. And I personally think it's worth investigating the benefits of either of these choices. Next up in the form, let's take a look at ramp plunge move. So this is where we look at adding a ramp entry move or not. To add one, we can use the checkbox here, and that will enable us to apply a distance. So this is the length of the ramp plunge that we want to put in there. So for this example, let's just go with 1 inch. Okay, so it's going to create a 1 inch diagonal pattern, and then we could simply go to calculate, but we'll press Control and calculate in this case so it can stay in the form. And if we take a look up the y-axis and we'll just move that over, we can see that the ramp plunge moves represented by this aqua coloured line that we've got here. So you can see we've got this diagonal move going into the material like so. And so this just basically stops you cutting vertically in with the tools. Some tools don't really have a good cutting face when moving vertically downwards, and so adding the actual ramp itself provides some horizontal movement, which just lessens the wear and tear of the tool. So let's just uncheck that option and we'll put that back in Z. Next, we'll look at using multiple vectors to create pockets where we have vectors sat inside other vectors. So let's just tile our windows, and then over in the 2D view, I'm going to press Control followed by the letter A to select all of the vectors within our job. Keeping all the parameters the same, we're just going to go ahead and press Control and calculate to see the effects of this toolpath with those vectors that we currently have selected. So when we have vectors within vectors, then what the software will do is machine in between the first two vectors, then it will leave a gap before machining inside the next set of vectors. So let's just go ahead and we'll calculate that, and then we'll go and preview that. We'll just slow this down just so you can take a look at how this is going to look. So if we just preview this over here, I might want to speed that up actually. Okay, so it's done the first square, and then what it's done, it's machined everything between the star and the circle, the outer circle, and then inside of the circle here. And then for the text, it's doing the outside border, and then it's going to leave a gap, and then it will work its way onto the next area to clear, which is in between this vector and the actual word text itself. And so the software will do the hard work for you in determine which side of the vector the toolpath is actually going to machine on to create the actual series of pockets. So let's have a look at the effects when we delete some of these vectors. So let's close out the preview toolpath form. We'll double click to go back into our pocket toolpath. Just going to press Shift and then select this vector here to deselect it. Shift and we'll select the star to deselect that. And then we could go ahead and we can press Calculate. Okay, and if we just reset that preview there, and then we'll go ahead and we'll preview that toolpath. So we'll just speed that up ever so slightly, so you can see that we have very different results this time. And you can see we've got the toolpath machining between this vector and this vector, and then it machines itself between the actual text itself. And then over here, we're machining between the outer circle and the inner circle. And so it's very important to select the right number of vectors and make sure that you have additional vectors on the outside if you need to change the order that this is going to pocket them in. So let's just go ahead and we'll reset that preview, close out of the preview toolpath form, and we'll just double click to go back into the pocket toolpath. So now let's just drag and select all of the vectors that we've got here in the 2D view. And now we're going to take a look at how we can control the number of Z levels that we create when we cut the toolpath by using the Edit Passes option. So previously we've defined this by using the Edit Tool option here, and if we click on that, you can see we have our pass depth. And so the software will divide up the depth of cut using the pass depth as a maximum that it shouldn't exceed. So let's just change that to 0.1 for this example. And then we could go ahead and we can press OK. So now we can see that we're going to machine this in 3 passes, and we can look at editing these passes by using the Edit Passes option. So if we click on that, that will open up a form where we can be very specific about the depths of cut to apply to this toolpath. So by default, what the software has done is it's looked at the pass step that we set for the tool, so 0.1 in this case, and then it will look for a number that it can divide the depth of cut equally into that will make sure that each depth of cut is below 0.1, or the value that we've set in the pass depth. So here we're getting passes which are at a depth of 0.0833 inches per pass. Now, in some cases, you still may want to maintain that pass depth and not divide the part up equally, in which case you can come down to this option here and use the option to maintain exact toolpath depth. And if we check that option, it will basically tell you that your tool has a pass depth of 0.1, so 2 passes are going to be at 0.1 of an inch with a final pass that is going to be 0.05 to create your full cut depth of 1/4 of an inch. And then you can use the Set Passes option where the graphic will be updated here at the top. So here we can see we've got our first pass at 0.1 of an inch, our second at 0.2, and our final pass at 1/4 of an inch to match the complete cut depth that we want to cut this down to. Notice that when I click on each one of these passes, the graphic on the left actually updates, displaying a red line to show which pass we are looking at, and this red line kind of shows you where that pass depth is in relation to your material thickness, which is indicated by this beigey coloured rectangle here. And we can just click to switch between each one of those. We can also click on the actual line itself. So let's just uncheck this option to maintain the exact toolpath depth, and we'll just go with the default settings. So we'll use the set passes option here. And that will just update the graphic at the top again. So we're seeing our first pass at 0.0833 and so on, where we're cutting in equal amounts to cut the entire cut depth specified. Now we can add new passes if we wanted to. So at the bottom here we could look at using the arrow key, and you can see that I can go up and down, so I can put in as many passes as I'd like, and with each arrow click you can see that the pass steps updating up here along with the actual graphic as well. We can use the down arrow to decrease them. We can also type in a value, so we could put 8 and then use the set passes option, and then we can again just use the arrow key, so we'll just put that down to 4 passes there. And so the software is going to divide 4 passes equally into the 1/4 inch cut depth, where we're getting a 1/16 of an inch per pass. And we can see again it's been updated here. So we've got 1/16, then to an 1/8 to 0.1875 to 1/4. We have a further option here, and that is the ability to set the last pass thickness. And so what that does, it enables you to define the depth of the cut for the final Z level. So if we check that, for example, if we put in 0.02 in there and then go ahead and press apply, we can see that we've added an additional level in here so that we're only cutting 0.02 of an inch on our final pass. Now this can be helpful in some materials from a finishing point of view to reduce the load on the pass or the last pass, or if you are cutting all the way through the material, then it can be helpful to make sure that it's holding the part in place, but making sure that you're not loading the tool up too much when you do the final pass. So we're just going to uncheck that for this example. So then we can use the set passes option just to update our pass depth there. Okay, we do have the ability to delete passes. For example, we can select this 0.125 here, and we can use the delete key, or we could double click on the red line graphic and that will just remove that there. So now we can see that we are cutting this in 3 passes. So we've got one at 0.0625, one at 0.1875, and then a final one at 0.25. We can also edit a pass to be very specific. For example, we could alter this one. So we can see between the first pass and then this pass, we've got quite a deep pass there, so we could look at reducing that if we wanted to by just typing in a value. So we could say 0.15 in this case, and then press apply to update that, and you'll see that the graphic has updated. And then if we wanted to, we could also look at clearing all of the passes just to cut this out in one pass. And so you can see that we have lots of control over all of the individual passes. So let's just put this back so that we're setting this at 3 passes, set those passes, and then we can just OK there. And then we'll go ahead and we'll press calculate. And then we'll just go ahead and we'll preview this toolpath. So there's first pass, second, third pass, and you can see each of those passes within that preview. Now, if we take a look at our preview, if you just maximize the 3D view, you can see that we do have a little bit of an issue, and that's cutting between some of the characters, so the E and the X and the X and the T. And the reason that we're seeing this is because the tool can't actually fit in between those letters. And so if I wanted to cut in between those letters, then we could look at increasing the spacing between the text characters. But if I wanted to keep the text as it is, then we could simply look at using a smaller tool that will actually fit in between those characters. So if we just take a look at our 2D view, and we're just going to switch on the visibility of our toolpath. So at the moment we're seeing that as a wireframe, so we're actually seeing the paths and the directions that the toolpath is going to create to cut this out. But if we use this option here, we can switch to a solid view, and so everything that you can see here that is purple is what the tool can machine away. And so we can see here that we are going to be left with this bridge here, as well as this kind of little tear that which we've got there. So what we can do is we can look at using another tool as part of our toolpath. So to do that, let's just go ahead and we'll just go back into our Pocket Toolpath. So if we double click on that. So here we can just go ahead and we can remove this tool. I can use the select option to open up the tool database. We'll go for that 1/8 inch end mill, press select, and put that to a raster strategy where we're doing that as a profile last. And then we can press Control and calculate, and the software will update how that looks here in the 2D view. And so now we can see that that tool is able to fit in between those characters to machine that nice and clean. So we are using a smaller tool. It will mean that it's going to take longer to machine than when I was using the larger tool. So another option that we do have, and that is to use multiple tools, where we can use one large tool to clear out the pocket, and then we can use a smaller tool to finish between the gaps that we had earlier, so between the X and the T and the E and the X. So let's just go back into the form, and we can look at adding in a larger tool as well as the 1/8 inch end mill. So to do that, we use the select option here, and we can select our 1/4 inch end mill where we can use the select option. Okay, so now we have two tools in the list, and you'll notice that the software has moved the 1/4 inch up to the top of the list. So it always lists the larger tools first, followed by the subsequent smaller tools. Okay, so we're just looking at an example here of just two tools. So we've got a 1/4 inch and an 1/8 inch tool. Then we could go ahead and we can press calculate. So let's just reset that preview, and then we'll just switch off the visibility of those toolpaths. So to start with, we're going to use the 1/4 inch tool. You'll see that it has appended the word clear 1 on the end of that toolpath. That's just to indicate to you that this is a clearing toolpath. This is one of the larger tools that you're going to use. And we can take a look in the 2D view, and we can see that that tool isn't able to get to those areas. So let's just preview this toolpath. Okay, and we can see how that looks. So again, between the E and the X and the X and the T, it's not machining that away. And then we have a smaller tool, which is the 1/8 inch end mill. And if we check the visibility of that, this will just go around all of the areas that the larger tool couldn't quite get to. And so you can see it's only concerned with those areas. So we're not remachining anything, just getting into all of the smaller areas that the larger tool could not previously. And so we could go ahead and we can preview this toolpath, and you can see that we are now able to clear out the smaller parts that that larger tool could not. So now let's take a look at another example where we can take a look at the effects of using multiple tools. So we're going to go and open an existing file from the project folder, Pocket Toolpath Example 2, then we could go ahead and open that up. So here we have a novelty license plate and we want to pocket everywhere between this vector here and all of the text. So you can see that we have a combination of very large and very small spaces. And so we could look at using a variety of tools to help us clear this out in the most efficient way. So let's just go over to the Toolpaths tab. We're just going to select all of the vectors that we want to pocket inside of. Then we could go into the Pocket Toolpath. So let's just remove the tools that we've currently got in our Pocket Toolpath here. Now when we come to physically machine a project like this that has multiple tools in the toolpath, we will always machine the area using the largest tool to begin with, and then we'd work our way down to the smallest tool. So naturally we're going to look at picking the largest tool to begin with. So if we use the select option here, I'm going to look at using the 1.5 inch end mill to start with. We'll use the select option there, where we're going to look at machining that in an offset strategy. We'll set the cut direction here to climb. And then for the purpose of this demonstration, if we just go ahead and press Control and calculate, that way we can see the toolpaths in our 2D view. We're just going to switch from the wireframe to the solid view. So you can see everywhere that is purple is where this 1.5 inch tool is able to fit inside. So there's still quite a vast amount of material that we're not quite filling. That could do with a second size down. So to do that, let's just go ahead and we'll use the select option to add in another tool. So we'll use the select option here. And this time we're going to have a look at using the 1/2 inch end mill, and we can select that. Now it's worth noting that with each subsequent tool that we add into this toolpath, we can actually tweak the setup for each one of those tools. For example, we could look at editing the passes for the 1/2 inch end mill by using this option here, where that will open up the pass step form that you saw earlier. We can alter our passes. Let's say we want that at 3 passes, so we can OK that and it will tell us that's at 3 passes. If you click back to the 1.5 inch tool, it will say that the passes for this tool is in 1 pass, okay? And if we click back there, we can go back to edit those passes and we just put that back to 1 pass at 1/4 inch. So it's just worth remembering that the edit passes is on an independent tool basis. And not only that, with all subsequent tools as well, they will be machined in the offset strategy, but you can still alter the cut direction on a per tool basis. So you can alter whether you want that to climb or whether you want that as conventional cutting. And then on top of that, you can also choose whether you want to add ramp plunge moves, again on a per tool basis if you wanted to. Okay, so let's just go with what we've got there. Again, we'll press Control and calculate, and you'll see that our 2D view is updated. We're now clearing a lot more of that material away. There's still areas that need to be filled in. For example, Nevada 2020, and in between the 4 and the corners of the 8 and the 9 over here. So again, let's say we use the select option. We'll add in another tool. Okay, so this is going to be the 1/4 inch tool. We can select that, and again you can see that's now been added to our tools list. Notice that we do have arrows on the right hand side. I mentioned earlier that the software will automatically default the order of your tools as you enter them, going from largest to smallest, but if you did want to change that, you can. So now the first tool that would be machined would be the 1/4 inch end mill in this case, followed by the 1.5 inch, followed by the 1/2 inch tool. In this case, I'm going to move that to the bottom. I want to go in order of size here, going from largest to smallest. So there's our 1/4 inch. Again, let's press Control and calculate. Okay, so you can see we've got a lot more of that material has been machined away. However, there's still some small areas here that we're actually not quite getting. So let's go in and we'll select another tool. This time we will go for the 1/8 inch tool, and then we could go ahead and we can select that, press Control and calculate to see how that looks, and there we are able to machine everything away. Okay, so I'm happy with what we've got there. So let's just close out and we can take a look at the toolpaths. So we can see that we have 4 pocket toolpaths. We've got our first clearance, our second clearance, the third, and then the final pocket. And if we hover over each one, we can see which tool is being used where. So the 1.5, the half, the 1/4, and then the 1/8. And if we just double click on any one of these pocket toolpaths, we can make changes. For example, let's say we wanted to edit the passes for this toolpath. We could just say edit passes. Let's just do that in one pass and then calculate, and it will recalculate all of those toolpaths for us. So now we could go ahead and we can preview the first toolpath. Okay, so this is using the 1.5 inch tool. Then we can move on to the 1/2 inch tool and we can preview that. And then we can move on to the 1/4 inch to preview that. And then finally onto the 1/8. We can preview that along with a profile pass that's already been created. And then we can just double click to remove the waste material. And there you can see that we've got our license plate all machined using 4 different pocket toolpaths. So it's a much more efficient approach to machining, where we're only machining the areas that the previous tool couldn't cut. The downside is that I am going to have to make a tool change. So you'll have to just figure out what kind of method works best for yourself. So now let's just go back to our original example. So we've got this file. We're just going to double click on any one of these toolpaths. And then for the purpose of this example, we're just going to use one tool here. So we're going to remove that. And if you go to the edit options, we can just take a look. We're just going to simplify this a little bit. So we're going to make the pass depth for this 1/4 inch. And we could go ahead and press OK. Now, it may be advantageous for us to apply a slight overcut or undercut to our pockets. So to do this, we can enter a pocket allowance. A positive number will undercut the size of the pocket to whatever value we specify in here. For example, let's put in 0.05 and then we'll press Control and calculate. Just maximize the 2D view, zoom active view to the drawing limits, and we can see the effect of this positive allowance to our pocket. And you can see that we've actually created a smaller pocket based on this allowance. So the nice thing about this is that I can change the size of the pocket without having to change or create any new vectors. Alternatively, we could do the opposite, and that's applying a negative allowance, which means we overcut our pocket. So here we could put negative 0.05 in there. We could go ahead and press Control and calculate, and then you can see that by applying that negative allowance, we're actually overcutting that. So you can see the effect of that there. And so applying allowances, negative allowances, may be advantageous to us if we wanted bigger or smaller pockets. So let's just reset that. We'll put that back to 0. We'll press Control and calculate. And now we're going to look at another option available within the Pocket Toolpath form, and that is the Use Vector Selection option. And so to show this function, let's have a look at a different file. So just go to File, Close, and then we'll go ahead and we'll open an existing file from the project folder and to look at Pocket Toolpath Example 3. So let's just switch over to the Toolpaths tab. I'm just going to drag a box to select all of the vectors. I'm going to go back into the Pocket Toolpath. So here we're going to cut down 1/4 of an inch using a 1/4 inch end mill. Let's use the edit option. Pass step for that is 1/4 of an inch, so I'm happy with that. So we'll go ahead and press OK. And then we could simply go ahead and just press calculate. And we can see how the Toolpath has calculated that for us. Now, I don't have any control over the order that the software machines these in. It just picks what it considers to be the most efficient order. So you can see it's starting with this square here. So it's going from our 0, 0 to our first square, to the next square, this one, then over to the right, right again, down, to the left, down, right, down, left, and then that's the last square that it will cut out. Now, if I wanted to control the order that all of these squares are machined in, then I can from within the Pocket Toolpath form. So let's just double click on that toolpath to go back into the form. And then this is where we use this option here, use vector selection order. So we can check that. If we just go into the 2D view, just deselect that. We can then say we want to select this vector, followed by the shift key where we select this vector, shift to select this one to the right, and then we'll go down. We'll select those, then to the right, and then we'll go up. And we'll select those to the right, and then we'll come back down to our last square. Okay, so we're going up, right, down, right, up, right, down. And then we could just go ahead and we can press calculate. And we can see just looking at the toolpath, it's actually respecting that order that we selected those vectors. And so we could go ahead and preview. So there's a first, and it's going down, to the right, up, to the right, and down again. So if you wanted to control the order that your vectors are machined in, then I'd use that option. Let's go back into the Pocket Toolpath form. We're going to look at the final option that we've not covered yet within this form, and that is the option to use the vector selector. So this is the same selector that you will see in most of the Toolpath forms. And if you click on the selector button, this will open up the vector selector. And this form allows you to select vectors automatically based upon various criteria where you can associate vectors with layers and toolpaths. Now, I'm not going to go into this, but it is covered in a number of other tutorials. So that completes this in-depth guide to the Pocket Toolpath. Thank you for watching.